The desert stretched endlessly, a sea of golden sand under a merciless sun, broken only by the jagged cliffs that marked the edges of the valley. Mara had lived on the outskirts of this small settlement for nearly a decade. Her home, a modest cabin built from weathered wood and stone. To most villagers, she was an enigma, widowed young, with no children, her beauty faded slightly by the sun and the weight of solitude. Mara had long stopped seeking the company of others. The bustling gossip and judgment of neighbors had driven her inward, leaving only her thoughts, the wind, and the distant cry of hawks as companions. On this particular afternoon, the wind carried a strange sound, rhythmic and deliberate, a series of footsteps over the sand unlike any she had heard before. Mara's first instinct was caution. Her hand instinctively tightened around the handle of the small knife she kept at her belt, though it had rarely been needed. The sound drew closer, accompanied by the faint scent of smoke and earth, a smell not of her village but of the open desert. Through the shimmering heat waves, a figure appeared on the ridge. At first he looked almost spectral, tall and lean, moving with a quiet strength that suggested both patience and experience. His skin bore the warm copper tone of someone who had lived under the sun for years, and his hair, long and dark, framed a face marked with both youth and the hard lessons of survival. His eyes, however, held an unexpected softness, a calm intelligence that seemed to study the land, and Mara herself with equal measure. Mara watched silently as he descended toward her cabin, his movements cautious but deliberate. There was something in his posture that spoke of confidence and awareness. He was not a stranger in distress, but someone accustomed to navigating a harsh world. The villagers had told stories of Apache warriors, fierce and proud, and Mara felt a chill of recognition. Yet there was no hostility in his gaze, only a quiet resolve. When he finally stopped a few paces from her cabin, he raised a hand in a gesture of peace. "I mean no harm," he said, his voice low but steady, carrying the weight of authority without arrogance. His words, spoken in a dialect Mara didn't fully recognize, were accompanied by a subtle accent that hinted at a life lived far from the village. Mara's heart raced. Here was a man from beyond her known world, and she had no allies to guide her through this encounter. She took a cautious step forward, her knife still in hand, though she did not raise it. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice firm despite the tremor beneath it. "And why are you here?" The man paused, lowering his hand slightly but not removing it entirely. "My name is Kay," he said. "I have traveled far, and I seek a place to rest. The world is not kind to those like me anymore." There was a weariness in his tone, a weariness that Mara understood all too well. She had known loss, isolation, and the cruel indifference of life. The recognition of shared hardship softened her initial suspicion, though she remained guarded. Kay's eyes wandered briefly to her home, to the modest garden she had cultivated with care, to the smoke rising from the chimney. "You live alone," he observed, not as a question but a statement of fact. His gaze was neither intrusive nor judgmental. It simply acknowledged what Mara already knew. Mara's lips pressed into a thin line. "I do," she replied, "and it suits me." But even as she spoke, she felt a flicker of doubt. Years of solitude had carved deep grooves of loneliness in her heart, grooves she often tried to ignore, and yet the presence of this stranger, strong and alert, stirred something she had long buried, a curiosity, a cautious hope that perhaps the world still held unexpected allies. Kay nodded, understanding more from her posture than her words. "Perhaps," he said, "then you will not mind if I stay for a time. The desert is unforgiving, and I have no other refuge." His request was simple, practical, but Mara sensed a deeper purpose, a shared need that transcended mere survival. For a long moment, Mara studied him. The wind whispered through the cliffs, carrying the scent of sage and dust. Something in Kay's presence spoke to a possibility she had never dared consider, an opening in her carefully constructed solitude. She lowered her knife, though not entirely, keeping a line of caution as she weighed her options. "Very well," she said finally. "You may rest here, but be warned, this is my home, and my rules must be respected." Kay's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, a recognition of mutual understanding and unspoken agreement. And so the first threads of connection were woven between the lone woman and the warrior from the desert, two lives poised on the edge of change, each shaped by loss, longing, and the quiet hope that even in the harshest landscapes, unexpected, companionship could take root. The sun dipped lower behind the jagged cliffs, painting the desert in shades of crimson and gold. Shadows stretched across Mara's cabin, slanting over the walls she had built to protect herself from the harshness of both the desert and the world beyond. Kay moved with quiet ease, unpacking his few belongings with a careful precision that suggested discipline and experience. Mara observed him from the doorway, arms crossed, heart uneasy yet inexplicably drawn to his presence. Despite her cautious welcome, a tension simmered between them. Mara had lived alone for years, cultivating a life free from interference, judgment, or obligation. Every corner of the cabin bore the mark of her control. The garden she tended meticulously, the shelves lined with supplies she had gathered, and the small hearth she kept burning for both warmth and comfort. Kay's intrusion, however temporary, disrupted the rhythm she had carefully maintained. She noticed the way his eyes lingered on the small garden, the herbs she had planted, and the water barrels she had stocked for the approaching night. He didn't touch anything, but his gaze carried a subtle curiosity that Mara found simultaneously unnerving and oddly comforting. There was no threat in him, she realized, yet there was something powerful in his presence, a strength born of survival, of battles fought both in the open desert and in the hidden depths of human experience. Kay finally spoke, his voice low and even. "You live well for one person." There was no judgment in his tone, only observation. Mara's initial reaction was defensive. "I am capable," she replied sharply, though she quickly softened when she realized her own bitterness colored her words. "I manage," he nodded, acknowledging her answer without pressing further. Silence settled over the cabin, punctuated only by the wind whistling through the cliffs and the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards. In the quiet, Mara found herself studying him more closely. His clothing was worn but functional, the leather patched in several places, suggesting a man accustomed to hardship but not careless about appearance. His hands, calloused and strong, hinted at years of labor and battle. Mara felt a pang of both admiration and fear, admiration for his resilience, fear of the unknown he represented. As evening fell, Mara lit the hearth, the fire casting a warm glow that softened the lines of her cabin. Kay sat near the flames, careful not to invade her space, but not withdrawing entirely either. He moved with a deliberate awareness, as if every action was measured against some internal code. Mara, meanwhile, fidgeted with the hem of her dress, uneasy under his quiet scrutiny. She had not shared her home with another soul in years, and the intimacy of this shared space brought a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Their conversation, when it came, was cautious, tentative. Kay asked about the village, the desert, and the seasons, speaking in a tone that was neutral but observant. Mara responded briefly, careful not to reveal too much about her inner life. Yet despite their polite exchange, a subtle tension lingered, a barrier neither knew how to breach. Mara's pride and independence warred with a strange pull toward this man who seemed to understand, without words, the solitude she had embraced. As the night deepened, Mara began to notice small gestures that unsettled her. The way Kay's gaze softened when he looked at the fire, the way he occasionally paused as if listening to the desert itself, and the faint, unspoken awareness that he was assessing her as much as the land. He did not ask for her trust outright, yet his presence demanded it in subtle ways. Mara found herself both resisting and acknowledging it, a push and pull that left her heart racing. Finally, the quiet stretched into a moment of almost unbearable stillness. Kay broke it gently. "You are cautious," he said, his voice carrying a calm understanding. "It is wise. The world can be cruel to those who trust too easily." His words resonated with Mara, echoing the lessons she had learned through years of isolation. And yet, beneath the caution, there was a suggestion, soft but unmistakable, that trust could bring something more than survival. It could bring connection. Mara's gaze dropped to her hands, roughened by years of labor, and she felt the weight of her solitude pressing against her chest. She had chosen this life, yes, but in the quiet glow of the fire she recognized something. She had denied herself for too long, the yearning for companionship, for someone to share both the burdens and small joys of life. The tension in the room was no longer just about caution. It was about possibility, the fragile, delicate potential of two lives intersecting in a desert that demanded both vigilance and courage. The night ended without resolution. Kay settled onto a mat near the fire, maintaining a respectful distance, while Mara retreated to her bed, mind whirling with thoughts of trust, survival, and something she could not yet name. The initial tension between them remained, a taut line of uncertainty, but beneath it, a subtle undercurrent had begun to flow, a tentative recognition that perhaps, in this harsh, unyielding world, neither of them needed to be entirely alone. The next morning, the desert was quiet, the wind gentler than the day before, carrying a faint scent of sage and the distant promise of rain. Mara moved through her small garden, tending her herbs and vegetables with practiced hands. Her mind, however, was elsewhere. Thoughts of Kay lingered, despite her efforts to dismiss them. There was a weight in the cabin now, a subtle tension that neither had yet named, a pull that both frightened and intrigued her. Kay sat near the doorway, observing her with a patience that made Mara uncomfortable. He said nothing at first, merely watching the way the sunlight caught in her hair, the careful rhythm of her movements. Mara sensed his attention but refused to meet his gaze directly. In her solitude, she had grown accustomed to controlling the pace of her interactions. With Kay, that control felt fragile, almost fragile enough to slip through her fingers. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and deliberate, carrying the weight of something more than mere conversation. "You are alone," he said. The statement was simple, factual, but it reverberated with a deeper understanding. Mara stiffened. She had lived with her solitude for years, embraced it even, yet hearing it spoken aloud made it tangible in a way that startled her. "And you are not?" she replied, her tone defensive despite the flutter in her chest. She glanced at him, catching the depth in his eyes that seemed to see not just her exterior, but the loneliness embedded in her very being. Kay shook his head gently. "No, I am childless," he admitted, his voice unflinching. There was no shame, no bitterness, only the quiet acknowledgement of a gap in his life, a longing he did not disguise. Mara blinked, taken aback by the honesty, the unexpected intimacy of such a confession. The words hung in the air, charged and heavy. Mara felt her pulse quicken. She had never considered the possibility of companionship like this. Not in years. Her mind raced with questions: morality, survival, societal judgment, and the fragile hope of a family she had once imagined in fleeting, solitary dreams. Kay's gaze remained steady, unshaken, as if he had anticipated every doubt before it, even formed in her mind. Then he said it, clearly, without hesitation. "Let us fix that together." The simplicity of the statement struck Mara like a spark in dry grass, immediate, potentially transformative, yet dangerous. Her breath caught, and she instinctively stepped back, the rhythm of her heart a rapid echo against the quiet of the desert. "Together," she repeated, her voice uncertain, a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. The word carried a weight she had not anticipated. To accept such a proposal would mean opening herself to another human soul in a way she had not dared for years. It meant crossing boundaries she had drawn for safety, dignity, and survival. Kay nodded slowly, unflinching. "Yes, together. Not just for survival, not just for comfort, but for something more. A family, a bond, something that neither of us has known, but both of us desire." His eyes were steady, earnest, and in them Mara glimpsed the rarest thing she had almost forgotten: certainty. Mara looked down at her hands, rough from years of work, and realized how much she longed for a connection, a shared life, a future that did not involve solitude. She thought of the empty chairs at her table, the silent nights, the absence of laughter and small voices. Her heart ached, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine a possibility, an unconventional life with this stranger who somehow understood her. And yet, fear lingered. The consequences were immense. Villagers would not understand. There were laws, traditions, and whispers of judgment waiting beyond her door. Could she trust him? Could she surrender her independence to someone she had barely known for a day? Mara's mind whirled with questions, but beneath the fear was a flicker of hope, bright and stubborn, refusing to be extinguished. Kay stepped closer, slowly, respectfully, not demanding but offering. "You do not need to decide now," said. "I only ask that you consider it. I will remain, and we can learn, and we can see if what I offer is something you might want, not something forced upon you." His patience was a balm, his honesty disarming. Mara nodded slowly, a mixture of apprehension and curiosity settling in her chest. She did not answer him fully, not yet. But for the first time, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that perhaps solitude was not the only life available to her, that trust could lead to something richer, and that the desert, harsh and unyielding, might yet witness a beginning neither of them had dared to imagine. The air between them hummed with unspoken understanding. Words were unnecessary now. The proposal had been made, the seed planted. And in the quiet heat of the desert, Mara felt the first stirring of something long denied. A fragile hope that life could be shared, and that the empty spaces in both their lives might one day be filled together. The desert nights were silent, broken only by the whispering wind and the distant cry of a lone coyote. Mara lay awake on her modest cot, the faint glow of embers from the hearth casting flickering shadows on the walls. Kay slept quietly nearby, his breathing steady, untroubled. And yet, Mara could not find peace. The words he had spoken earlier, "You're alone. I'm childless. Let's fix that together," circulated endlessly in her mind like a restless wind, stirring both hope and unease. Mara had always been practical. She survived because she made careful choices, because she measured risk and reward before acting. Yet now, faced with Kay's proposal, logic collided with something deeper and more primal, the yearning for connection, for family, for something beyond mere survival. She turned over in her bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to weigh her options. Each possibility seemed fraught with danger. She imagined herself agreeing to Kay's plan. Could she truly trust him after knowing him for only a day? What would the villagers say if they discovered their arrangement? Mara knew the judgment would be swift and unrelenting. Their whispers could follow her for years, tainting her reputation and jeopardizing her safety. And yet, the thought of refusing him felt colder, lonelier, like shutting a door to a life she had secretly dreamed of but never dared to hope for. Mara's thoughts turned inward, to the years she had spent alone. The silence of her cabin had been both sanctuary and prison. She had nurtured her garden, repaired her home, and maintained her independence with pride, yet every night she had felt a hollow echo in her chest. There had been no laughter, no small footsteps, no shared warmth to offset the desert's chill. Could she truly deny herself a chance at companionship, even if it came from a man she barely knew? She considered Kay himself. There was something remarkable about him, his quiet strength, his patience, the way he had observed her with respect rather than intrusion. He did not demand, did not seek to control, yet he had offered her a gift few could even articulate: the possibility of shared life, of family, of a bond that could fill the empty spaces she had long carried alone. Mara felt a mixture of fear and fascination. Could she let herself lean on him, even slightly, without losing herself entirely? The practical questions plagued her. How would they manage life together? Could she adapt to his world, the traditions he carried, and the realities of being part of a shared household again? She had spent so long in control of every detail of her life. Could she relinquish some of that control without regret? And more intimately, could she share her body, her heart, with someone she barely knew but who claimed to understand the deepest recesses of her longing? Mara sat up and wrapped a thin blanket around her shoulders. The desert wind pressed against the cabin walls, a reminder of the harshness beyond her small sanctuary. She thought about her late husband, the life they had shared and lost, and the child they had never had. A pang of sorrow struck her, an old wound that had never fully healed. Kay's words had reopened it, not cruelly, but gently, offering her the possibility of healing through something new, something she could shape with intention rather than tragedy. Her heart wrestled with her mind. Fear demanded caution. Desire whispered of risk worth taking. Loneliness pleaded for solace. And in that quiet, Mara realized the dilemma was not merely about Kay. It was about herself, about confronting the patterns she had created, the walls she had built, and the vulnerability she had avoided for too long. As dawn approached, painting the desert in soft shades of pink and gold, Mara finally allowed herself a small acknowledgement of truth. She was tempted. She was curious. And, despite all reason and logic, a part of her wanted to take that leap, to trust Kay, to explore what life might look like if she let someone in. But she was not yet ready to answer him, not fully. She needed time to wrestle with fear, desire, and morality, to reconcile the boundaries she had lived by with the possibility of an unconventional future. Mara leaned back against the cot, closing her eyes as the first light touched the cabin. The dilemma remained unresolved, heavy yet compelling. It was not merely a choice about Kay, she realized, but a choice about herself, whether to remain in the safety of solitude or to risk the unknown for a chance at a life richer, fuller, and deeply human. And somewhere, in the quiet of that desert dawn, she sensed the pull of possibility, a fragile, dangerous yet undeniable hope that the life she had imagined alone could, perhaps, be shared. The morning sun bathed the desert in a pale, forgiving light, softening the harsh contours of the cliffs and casting a golden glow over Mara's cabin. The night had been long and restless, filled with thoughts of Kay, of her own solitude, and of the unusual proposition he had made. When she finally rose, she carried an unspoken decision with her, though even she did not fully understand it. Yet Kay was already awake, tending a small fire near the doorway. His movements were deliberate and careful, yet there was a calmness to him that Mara found both comforting and unnerving. He looked up as she stepped into the morning light, meeting her gaze with the same quiet intensity she had noticed before. There was no expectation in his eyes, only patience, a patience that felt like an invitation to step closer, even when fear urged her to step back. Mara took a deep breath and approached him. "I've thought about what you said," she began, her voice low and measured, as though she were testing the words before letting them take form. Kay remained silent, his expression open, encouraging her to continue. She hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest. She looked away, toward her garden, the herbs and vegetables she had nurtured alone for years. The image of them, thriving under her care, seemed to mirror the fragility and potential of what she was about to choose. I think we can try. Kay's eyes softened, a subtle warmth spreading across his features. He did not move closer immediately. He waited, honoring the space Mara still needed. Try, he repeated gently, allowing the word to carry the weight of her intent without pressing for more. Yes, she said, turning back to face him fully. But on my terms. We need rules, boundaries. Trust must be earned, not demanded. And if it doesn't work, if this arrangement becomes more than I can handle, I need to know we can walk away. Her words were firm, deliberate, and honest, a reflection of the life she had led alone. Kay nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of her conditions. Agreed, he said. No expectations beyond what we are willing to give. Mutual respect. Shared responsibility and patience. I can offer all of that, nothing more and nothing less. His tone carried a quiet solemnity, a promise grounded in both reality and intention. Mara felt a sense of relief, a softening in the tension that had gripped her for days. The idea of trying, of stepping into something unknown but guided by mutual respect seemed less frightening than she had imagined. She realized that acceptance did not mean surrender. It meant courage, the willingness to risk discomfort and vulnerability for the possibility of growth, companionship, and even joy. The first step was simple. Kay would remain in the cabin, helping Mara with her daily tasks, learning the rhythms of her life and proving day by day that he could be trusted. They agreed to share chores, firewood, water, and food, though the arrangements were tentative, tested in small gestures of cooperation and observation. Mara found herself watching him closely, noting the care with which he handled even the smallest tasks, the thoughtfulness in his eyes, and the respect he showed for both her space and her autonomy. Over the next few days, their interactions became a delicate dance of observation, conversation, and subtle negotiation. Mara taught Kay the nuances of her garden, the timing of watering, the placement of herbs, and the secrets of tending vegetables in harsh soil. In turn, Kay shared knowledge of the desert, tracking signs of wildlife, finding hidden water sources, and demonstrating survival skills Mara had never needed alone. Each lesson built trust, each shared experience reinforcing the fragile bond that had begun to take shape. One evening, as the sun sank behind the cliffs and painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, Mara allowed herself a small smile. Kay, seated near the fire, returned it with a quiet nod, the unspoken acknowledgement of a tentative alliance between them. Neither had promised love, neither had claimed a future beyond the present, yet a mutual understanding had begun to emerge. That together they could face the challenges of both the desert and life itself, that their solitude could be shared rather than endured, and that trust, once cautiously given, could be the foundation of something remarkable. By accepting the proposal, Mara had not surrendered to Kay. She had chosen to open a door she had long kept closed to explore the possibility of companionship on her own terms. And as the night deepened and the desert settled into its quiet rhythm, she felt the first glimmer of hope that perhaps, in this unlikeliest of partnerships, they could indeed build a life together, one step, one choice, one shared moment at a time. The days that followed Mara's acceptance of Kay's presence were filled with quiet, measured routines. Yet beneath the surface, a subtle transformation was underway. The cabin, once a sanctuary of solitude, began to hum with shared energy. Tasks that had always been solitary became cooperative. Mara fetched water from the small cistern while Kay carried supplies, the rhythm of their movements gradually synchronizing without the need for words. Mara found herself studying Kay in ways she had never allowed with anyone else. He moved through the cabin with a grace that belied his muscular frame, attentive to small details. How the fire burned, the placement of her herbs, the organization of the tools. It was clear he respected her space, yet he also offered help, in ways that were neither invasive nor presumptuous. Mara realized she had never encountered such quiet attentiveness. It sparked a mixture of admiration and cautious curiosity. Kay too was learning, though perhaps more visibly. The customs of Mara's home, the patterns of her days, and the rhythm of her life were foreign to him. He asked questions, listened intently, and practiced the skills she taught him, from tending the garden to preparing meals. The mornings were often filled with shared labor, punctuated by brief conversations about the desert, the wildlife, or the weather. Mara, despite herself, began to enjoy the sound of his voice, its calm resonance offering a contrast to the silence that had long enveloped her life. Evenings were different. After the work of the day, they would sit near the fire, letting the embers cast a warm glow over the cabin. Conversation deepened, moving from practical matters to personal reflections. Kay shared stories of his past, the hardships and victories that had shaped him, the lessons learned from life in the desert and beyond. Mara, in turn, found herself opening up in ways she had long denied, speaking of her late husband, her fears, her regrets, and the moments of unexpected joy she had found in solitude. The bond between them grew in small, almost imperceptible ways. A shared glance over a task, a quiet acknowledgement of effort, a smile that lingered longer than necessary, all became threads in the fragile tapestry of trust and intimacy. Mara began to recognize patterns in Kay's behavior. The way he observed her without judgment, the subtle ways he anticipated her needs, and the patience he displayed when she faltered or doubted herself. She realized that trust was not an abstract concept, but a tangible daily practice, woven into the ordinary moments of shared life. Kay, too, adapted. He learned the pace of Mara's days, the timing of chores, and the rhythms of her solitary routines. He observed the small rituals she relied upon for comfort, the way she arranged her herbs, the precise method she used to tend the fire, the quiet moments she allowed herself to pause and reflect. In learning these patterns, Kay demonstrated not only skill but respect, showing Mara that he could be a partner without disrupting the order she had created. Their mutual teaching extended beyond the practical. Mara introduced Kay to the subtleties of emotional honesty, encouraging him to express thoughts and feelings he had long kept guarded. Kay, in turn, taught Mara the value of resilience in the face of uncertainty, of patience when results were slow, and of the strength inherent in vulnerability shared with someone trustworthy. Together, they discovered that learning from each other did not diminish independence. It enriched it, building a foundation for something neither had expected to find in the desert's harsh expanse. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the cliffs and the sky glowed with the soft hues of twilight, Mara found herself laughing, a full, unrestrained laugh, at a story Kay had shared about his travels. It startled her, the sound of joy after so long a silence, and she realized how deeply her life had already begun to change. Kay met her gaze with a faint, understanding smile, recognizing the moment as one of shared connection, of intimacy forged not through grand gestures, but through the quiet cadence of ordinary life. By the end of the week, the cabin felt transformed. It was no longer merely a refuge from the desert. It was a shared space, a place of learning, respect, and tentative affection. Mara and Kay had not yet crossed into love or full companionship, but they had built something equally essential: trust. They had discovered that connection could grow slowly, nurtured by patience, shared labor, and the willingness to be seen as one truly was. As the desert night settled around them, Mara watched Kay quietly tending the fire, and a sense of calm washed over her. In the harsh, unyielding landscape, They had created a small, fragile world together. And in that shared space, between work, stories, laughter, and silence, both Mara and Kay began to understand that the life they had, tentatively, agreed to explore could hold more than survival. It could hold growth, companionship, and the first stirrings of a future neither had dared to imagine. Word traveled faster than Mara had anticipated. In a small desert village, news rarely stayed quiet, and the arrival of a stranger, an Apache, warrior no less, at her cabin had already begun to stir whispers. At first it was subtle, glances from neighbors when she walked to the well, half-heard murmurs as villagers exchanged stories near the market, and the soft, judgmental shake of heads from those who prided themselves on propriety. Mara had hoped that her careful distance from the village would shield her from scrutiny, but the presence of Kay made her impossible to ignore. Even those who had long tolerated her solitude now viewed her with suspicion. Why would she take him in? Villagers asked each other. What is she thinking? The questions were not cruel, but insistent, fueled by fear of the unfamiliar and the untraditional. Mara felt the sting of judgment, though she had expected it, and tried to focus on the rhythm of life within her cabin. Kay noticed the tension immediately. His keen eyes, trained by years of observing both people and land, detected the subtle shifts in how the villagers treated Mara. Their stares carried caution and curiosity, and some, especially the older women, sent thinly veiled warnings in the form of whispered advice or pointed glances. He spoke to Mara gently one evening, his voice calm but firm. "They do not understand," he said. "We cannot control what they think, but we can control what we do and how we show them our intentions." Mara listened, torn between fear and pride. She had lived alone for years precisely to avoid the judgment of others. To suddenly be thrust into the scrutiny of her community, with Kay as the focal point of their speculation, was a challenge she had not anticipated. Yet as she watched him, she realized that his presence was not a threat, but a test, one she had chosen to face, not out of obligation but out of a quiet desire to protect the fragile trust forming between them. Tensions escalated when a small group of villagers ventured near her cabin one afternoon, ostensibly to gather firewood, but clearly to observe. Mara met their gaze with measured composure, refusing to offer explanations, yet silently asserting her right to autonomy. Kay remained at her side, standing slightly behind her, calm and unassuming, yet his presence radiated strength. It was clear to the villagers that he was no intruder seeking favors. He was a partner in her life, chosen and accepted by her. One particularly stern woman, Matilda, approached Mara directly. "I cannot understand why you allow him here," she said, her tone firm, bordering on accusation. "It is not proper. You know the risks. He is a stranger, a warrior from another land. You invite trouble into your home." Mara's eyes met Matilda's steadily. "He is no threat," she replied, her voice measured. "And I am capable of deciding what is proper for my life. His presence is mine to accept, not yours to judge." The confrontation sparked murmurs among the onlookers, but Mara felt a surge of empowerment. For the first time, she defended not just her home, but the choices of her heart. Kay, sensing the tension, stepped forward slightly, his calm demeanor amplifying Mara's courage rather than overshadowing it. He spoke softly but firmly. "We seek no harm to anyone. Our lives are ours, and we ask only for peace." His words carried the authority of someone used to conflict yet unwilling to escalate unnecessarily, and they seemed to settle the immediate unrest. Even as the villagers retreated, the experience left Mara shaken. She realized that building a life with Kay would not occur in isolation. The world beyond her cabin would always present challenges. The whispers, the judgment, the thinly veiled warnings, they were a reminder that trust and intimacy would require not only personal courage, but also the willingness to withstand external pressure. In the evenings that followed, Mara and Kay spoke at length about strategy and boundaries. They decided to maintain a delicate balance. Mara would continue her routines, reinforcing her independence, while Kay would demonstrate his respect for her home and community. Together, they devised ways to respond calmly to curiosity and judgment, emphasizing their shared commitment to trust and mutual respect rather than confrontation. Through these trials, Mara discovered a new dimension of strength. She realized that choosing Kay was not just about companionship, it was about asserting her autonomy in a world that constantly sought to confine her. And Kay, in turn, reinforced her resilience, showing that patience, integrity, and quiet authority could mitigate fear and hostility. By the time the sun set behind the desert cliffs, casting long shadows across the cabin, Mara and Kay sat near the fire in silent solidarity. The village may not have understood them yet, but they had weathered the first test together. And in that shared moment, Mara felt a deeper certainty. Their bond, though still tentative, was capable of withstanding not only the harshness of the desert, but the scrutiny of the world beyond their small sanctuary. The first signs were subtle, a faint unease, a lingering fatigue that Mara could not attribute to the long days of tending her garden or managing the cabin. At first, she dismissed them, convincing herself it was the desert heat, the strain of daily labor, or simply the mind playing tricks. But as the days passed, the signs grew undeniable. Mara realized, with a mix of shock, fear, and awe, that she was pregnant. When she finally shared the news with Kay, it was not through words alone. She took his hand in the quiet of the evening, the firelight dancing across both their faces, and let the truth settle between them. Kay's reaction was calm, measured, yet Mara could see the flicker of something deeper in his eyes, a mixture of wonder, reverence, and cautious joy. He did not speak immediately, allowing the significance of the moment to breathe. Finally, he said, "A life. Our life." The simplicity of the statement carried a weight that Mara felt down to her core. For the first time, the abstract possibilities they had discussed, the companionship, the trust, the tentative hope, became tangible. Their decisions, their shared days, their mutual care had led to this new life, a small, fragile spark that embodied both the past and the future. Pregnancy transformed Mara in ways she had not anticipated. The physical changes were accompanied by a profound emotional awakening. Each movement, each pulse of new life within her, brought a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The desert, once a place of solitude and survival, now seemed to teem with potential, as though every rock, plant, and whispering wind had conspired to nurture this life. Mara's perspective shifted. The hardships she had endured no longer seemed solely burdens to bear, but lessons that would equip her to protect and guide the child growing within her. Kay's role shifted as well. He became attentive in ways Mara had not expected, anticipating her needs before she spoke them, offering comfort during moments of discomfort, and celebrating the small joys, the first faint kicks, the way Mara's laughter had returned to the cabin, richer and more frequent than before. He spoke to the child even before birth, his deep voice a steady presence, a promise of protection and guidance. Mara watched him, realizing how naturally he had embraced the responsibilities of fatherhood, not as an abstract duty but as an expression of care and devotion. The transformation extended beyond the personal. Their bond deepened, strengthened by shared concern and mutual support. Mara no longer feared the judgment of the village as acutely. With Kay by her side, she felt empowered to navigate the world. Outside her cabin, they faced logistical challenges together, preparing a safe space for the child, ensuring supplies, and adapting routines to accommodate the new reality. Each adjustment reinforced their interdependence and built trust beyond what words alone could convey. Emotionally, the pregnancy demanded honesty and vulnerability. Mara found herself confronting fears she had long suppressed, of inadequacy, of failure, of the fragility of life. Kay offered steady reassurance, his presence a grounding force. They shared long conversations under the desert sky, speaking, not just of survival but of hopes, dreams, and the future they envisioned for their child. In these moments, Mara realized that trust had evolved into something deeper, a quiet, unspoken partnership rooted in shared responsibility, love, and the courage to embrace uncertainty. As weeks passed, the cabin became a place of preparation and reflection. Mara crafted small garments, arranged sleeping spaces, and spoke softly to the growing life within her. Kay shared stories of his own childhood and the legends of his people, teaching Mara that the child would inherit not only survival skills, but wisdom, culture, and resilience. Their daily routines, once focused on work and survival, now carried the rhythm of anticipation, of readiness for a new chapter in their lives. By the time Mara felt the first unmistakable kicks, both she and Kay understood the profound transformation that had occurred. The child represented more than a union of flesh and intention. It symbolized hope, continuity, and the merging of two lives once defined by solitude. Mara's heart, once guarded and heavy, now carried a lightness born of possibility. Kay's steady presence was no longer simply comforting. It was integral, a reminder that together they had created something enduring and beautiful. In the quiet of the desert night, Mara placed her hand over her belly and smiled. Kay mirrored her gesture, his fingers brushing gently against hers. The desert around them remained harsh, indifferent, and untamed, but within the walls of their cabin, life had shifted irrevocably. They were no longer merely surviving. They were creating, nurturing, and transforming themselves and the world they inhabited. And in that transformation, Mara felt a profound certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them, together, strengthened by trust, love, and the new life they had brought into the world. Time has a way of softening even the harshest judgments, and in the weeks and months following Mara's pregnancy, the village began to shift in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. At first, the whispers continued, hushed and cautious, carried between neighbors as they observed Mara and Kay from afar. The gossip, which had once carried suspicion and judgment, gradually softened into curiosity, tempered by the undeniable, evidence of their careful, respectful life together. Mara noticed the change first in small gestures, a neighbor offering a nod of acknowledgement when she fetched water, a passing comment that lacked its previous edge of disapproval, the occasional plate of food left at her doorstep. Kay observed the same signs, never imposing, never claiming credit, but letting their actions speak for themselves. Together, they continued their routines with quiet dignity, demonstrating that their shared life was founded on trust, respect, and responsibility rather than recklessness or defiance. The turning point came when a child from the village wandered near Mara's cabin, drawn by the scent of freshly baked bread. Mara, kneeling in her garden, looked up to see the small figure, watching curiously. Instead of shooing the child away, she offered a gentle smile and a few simple words. Kay, standing nearby, nodded in approval. The child's visit, harmless and innocent, marked a subtle bridge between Mara's isolated world and the village she had once kept at arm's length. From that moment, other villagers began to engage, cautiously. They saw Kay not as a threatening outsider, but as a capable, respectful presence who enhanced Mara's life rather than disrupting it. His attentiveness to her needs, his patience, and the care he showed for her growing child began to shift perceptions. Slowly, judgment turned to acknowledgement, and acknowledgement evolved into tentative acceptance. The elders, initially the most skeptical, were the last to soften. They observed Mara and Kay handling the practicalities of their shared life with integrity. They saw Kay carrying water, tending the fire, and assisting Mara with her garden, not out of obligation, but as a willing partner. They witnessed Mara's resolve, her strength, and the deliberate care she took in nurturing both her household and her child. Over time, the elders' disapproval was replaced by a grudging respect. They could not ignore the stability and harmony the pair had cultivated. One afternoon, Matilda, the woman who had confronted Mara early on, approached the cabin again. This time, however, her demeanor had changed. She spoke with a measure of humility, offering a small basket of food and a cautious smile. "I see now," she said softly, "that you are doing well. Perhaps I judged too quickly." Mara accepted, the gesture with quiet grace, realizing that acceptance was rarely immediate, but often earned through consistency, integrity, and visible care. Children of the village became another vector of acceptance. They watched Mara and Kay interact, saw the kindness in their actions, and gradually came to admire the harmony in their household. Their innocent approval influenced the adults, who found it harder to maintain prejudice when the next generation observed respect, cooperation, and love at work. The village, ever watchful, began to understand that family need not conform to tradition to be meaningful or legitimate. By the time Mara's child was born, the village's perception had shifted almost entirely. People who had once whispered in judgment now offered congratulations, assistance, and genuine smiles. Mara and Kay were no longer outsiders, but members of a community who had demonstrated, through patience and integrity, the value of trust and partnership. The child became a symbol not only of new life but of the possibilities of acceptance, bridging the gap between solitude and community, difference and understanding. Evenings in the cabin were now filled with a sense of security that extended beyond Mara and Kay. They knew that while the desert could be unforgiving, their broader world was capable of change. The community's acknowledgement reinforced their bond, but it also allowed Mara and Kay to relax into their roles, not only as partners but as parents, confident in their ability to navigate the challenges of life together. In this gradual, hard-won acceptance, Mara found a profound lesson, that trust, integrity, and steadfastness could transform not only private lives but public perceptions. And in Kay's steady presence beside her, she recognized that the life they had begun together, rooted in respect, patience, and courage, could flourish, even amidst a world that had once doubted them. The village had witnessed their journey, and in doing so had learned that love and family are defined not by convention, but by devotion, care, and the willingness to meet the world with honesty and grace. The desert morning was crisp, painted in shades of amber and rose, and for the first time in years, Mara felt a profound sense of peace. Her cabin, once a solitary refuge, had transformed into a home alive with warmth, laughter, and promise. The air carried the soft murmur of wind through the cliffs, the occasional call of distant birds, and the gentle cooing of the child, sleeping in a small cradle near the hearth. This was a life she had longed for, though in ways she had never imagined, shared, vibrant, and grounded in trust. Kay moved quietly across the room, checking the hearth and tending the small garden visible through the cabin window. His hands were strong, yet gentle, a reflection of both his past hardships and the care he now poured into the life they had created together. He glanced at Mara, who sat beside the cradle, her hand resting lightly on the child's soft blanket. Their eyes met, and no words were necessary. Years of shared labor, trust, and patience had built a bond that could be communicated with the slightest gesture, the briefest glance. The child stirred, a tiny fist curling and uncurling, and Mara smiled softly. The sound of life, so delicate and new, filled the cabin with a sense of completion that neither solitude nor shared survival alone could have provided. She thought back to the first day Kay had arrived, the cautious agreement to coexist, and, the journey through trust, fear, and eventual acceptance. Every step, every challenge had led to this moment, a beginning defined not by mere survival but by the creation of a family. Kay approached and knelt beside her, his presence a quiet pillar of reassurance. "She is strong," he said, his voice low, carrying a reverence that mirrored Mara's own awe. Mara nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude and love. The child was more than a symbol of their bond. She was a living testament to the courage it had taken to embrace vulnerability, to open their hearts, and to defy expectations. Their routine, though still shaped by the demands of parenthood, had become an intricate dance of shared responsibility. Mara prepared meals while Kay ensured the cabin remained safe and orderly. Together, they nurtured the child, attending to needs with a synchronicity born of mutual respect and observation. Even in moments of exhaustion or uncertainty, they relied on one another, the years of bonding and learning now forming an unbreakable foundation. The desert outside remained harsh and unyielding, yet within the walls of their cabin, Mara and Kay had created a microcosm of resilience, care, and hope. Mara often found herself watching Kay interacting with the child, his gentle touch, the soft cadence of his voice, and the patience with which he guided her tiny hands. It was a quiet miracle, the kind that could not be forced or planned, only nurtured and witnessed. Occasionally, the villagers would pass by, pausing to greet Mara, Kay, and the child. Their earlier suspicion had been replaced by respect and warmth. Mara observed these interactions with a sense of calm pride, knowing that the journey from isolation to acceptance had been neither easy nor instantaneous. The community had learned, as they had, that family and trust are defined not by tradition alone, but by love, integrity, and shared effort. As twilight fell over the desert, Mara, Kay, and the child sat together near the hearth. Mara's hand rested on the child, Kay's arm around her shoulder. They spoke softly, not of hardship or fear, but of hope, dreams, and the life they would build together. The cabin, once silent and solitary, now resonated with connection, warmth, and laughter, a reflection of the love that had been cultivated through patience, understanding, and courage. In that quiet moment, Mara felt the full weight of transformation. She had moved from loneliness and guardedness to partnership and parenthood. Kay had moved from solitary survival to shared responsibility and intimacy. Together they had created something enduring, a life that neither could have achieved alone, a family born of choice, trust, and the willingness to embrace vulnerability. The desert night settled around them, indifferent yet beautiful, and Mara realized that their journey was only beginning. Yet for the first time, she did not feel fear. The future, vast and uncertain, seemed rich with possibility. She squeezed Kay's hand gently and smiled down at their child, knowing that together they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The past had shaped them. The desert had tested them. And now, in this quiet, shared moment, they had found the courage to begin anew. Mara whispered softly, more to herself than anyone else, "We are home." And in the warm, flickering light of the cabin, surrounded by love, trust, and the life they had created, it was true.